Thanks, Chelsea. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to be viewed by this particular crowd. I think maybe the best way to put it is Luddites unite. And you can find us on Facebook. But I am, I guess, one of those, I come from a background of maybe being a Luddite when it comes to traceability. I have come a long way and do see traceability as an integral part of where the cattle industry is heading, and I hope you guys get through that big, terrible piece of what would it be, flow chart in order to get to traceability as you see fit, and my compliments to you to even try and tackle it, particularly when I talk to some of the folks about how much has gone on regarding the history of this file. So from your perspective, I think that's laudable on your part to continue on and keep on trying. It's something that probably needs to happen. I'm probably more of a proponent of animal disease traceability than I am anything else. Anything else, and you'll see that from my presentation, when it comes to the private sector pieces, the market access pieces, the product placement pieces of a traceability system, those can be both funded by and organized by private sector. They don't have to be industry organization delivered. And probably I'd be in the position of not wanting to go along with that if push came to shove. So I do have a few people to thank, both Chelsea for the introduction and the invitation, as well as Pierce Bennett and Jara Settles from LMA. They were instrumental in getting me down here, and I appreciate that very much. Did want to say hello to Julie Stitt and to Deb Wilson, who are both my compatriots here at the conference, and it's good to see them. We fight on several issues. We fight nice, and myself and Julie particularly have had probably been at odds from time to time, but we were both on the same plane yesterday and it didn't go down. Wonderful. So, here we go. I hope this works. So I'm going to give you a little context, and that's going to include, I'm a bit of a history buff, so please bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Alberta, a little about the history of beef as I see it. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to build I guess before I get into how to build a workable traceability system, the primary word of the title of my presentation is the idea that it be workable, not just this Taj Mahal or Cadillac system that we often talk about up in Canada, but not that we have that, but we often strive for that, and sometimes it's just not doable. That's not a failure. That's just knowing where your limits are and being able to work within them. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But before I do, I'll talk about some of the absolute nightmares that I faced during the last 15 years as an auction market owner, and some of the things that traceability bestowed on me, some of the experience it bestowed on me. Talk a little bit about how to build a workable traceability system, a little bit around the design of it, but I'm not an expert in that. I do consider myself a little bit, not an expert, but experienced in the idea of it being implemented. And sometimes I was on the fight to get it implemented. Sometimes I've been on the fight to slow that implementation train down. Talk a little bit about what's working, and then tell you what I think needs work. But please, 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 this is my perspective as we go forward. It's not the Livestock Markets Association of Canada. It's not Perlich Brothers Auction Market. This is the Ken Perlich Show, and this is how I feel, and I hope you can get something from that. If you don't, please put your feet up. I'll try and be as entertaining as possible, and you can digest your lunch. So, a little context. Start from Alberta perspective. So Alberta is a bastion of the cattle industry, and if you look from that red line over, we started out with OH Ranch, the Cochrane Ranch, all those sorts of things. They came along and were really, really big ranches. Then we had a situation where, and you see the boys on their horses, that is the RCMP that came out. They were the first people to be brand inspectors, but they were also there to bring law and order. And maybe it's the reason why in Western Canada we're more pliable as far as government regulation is concerned or not. Canada based on peace, order, and good government, while the United States is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So once the guys came across as far as the RCMP are concerned, they were our first brand inspection system and or first brand inspection implementers. Ranching still existed after those big ranches started to settle down, but some winters really kind of brought down the history, and the Homestead Act and Homestead regulations brought in this idea where we were in a situation where, holy smoke, we're no longer range managers. We are now looking at kind of early 1900s being farmers and sharecroppers and whatnot. Look to World War II and the time of the Depression. Alberta looks to be not necessarily the bread basket, but definitely the beef basket of Europe. And because of Smoot Hawley, all of our cattle weren't coming south anymore, or even our beef, but it was going towards the east and heading on trains toward Montreal, eventually to Europe. And part of that was trade policy, but it was also a matter of it was a situation where World War I, World War II, both of those situations needed beef to be fed to the soldiers, and we did our best to do that. You'll also see some irrigation pictures there. Southern Alberta particularly, starting from the Mormon settlers that came up from Utah, started in an irrigation process. We now have a very integrated agricultural area in southern Alberta. About 80% of the GDP from agriculture that is in the province comes from that little slice of the province, and that's because not only beef is processed there, and there's probably about 500,000 head of cattle on feed at any given time, or at least maybe that's the one-time capacity, let's call it that, that's in southern Alberta, but we also have vegetable producers, a lot more starting under glass and that sort of thing. So things are changing there. And things, I guess, started to change when we had BSE. And that changed for traceability, but it also changed for our industry. But what we do know is that that Alberta is still a home for of two world-class packing facilities, an established feeding industry, which in turn sources cattle, feedstuffs, cattle and feedstuffs from across Western Canada and into the United States. So we're still going strong, but it took us 10 years to get back on our feet, really, is I guess what the story is there. Just a little bit more context, and this one's to do with the consumer more than anything else. Once consumers of beef kind of knew where their product was coming from, it was coming from a butcher or even their own farms, and as we got to a situation where you could ensure healthfulness that way. But then you came to a situation where things became more modernized, more urbanized, and urbanization plodded forward. Large packing houses took on greater proportions, and slaughter activities, refrigeration, including refrigerated trucks, came around. We've got cryovac now, lots of more restaurant meals than we ever used to have before, and a lot of that, both government and consumer are looking to big data or the idea of a traceability system to now tell us where their product is coming from. That's not so much. I don't think I'm trying to say that rah, let's go that direction, because as an auction market owner, man, I'd sure like to stay in the 1880s. But we have to face that fact that people, I was watching people commute in at 6 o'clock this morning from out near the airport, and all those people need to get their beef from somewhere. And it always amazes me to see these people that we'll probably never ever meet them, but we're feeding them and trying to get them a healthful product. So when you think about those things and what are those people's relationship with their meat counter, that's where I think, a good place to put ourselves when we're in these discussions. Not even joking. Not even joking once. So the first joke I have is I'll love you in the morning. Promise. It's actually the joke about the 3 big lies. I'll love you in the morning. The check's in the mail. And this regulation won't apply to you, Mr. Auction Market Operator. So this, I guess, is the first piece of the context that actually applies to the traceability piece. It's a matter of, Julie can tell you how much we used to arm wrestle, my organization and hers as CCIA. And the idea that when we were starting to get those cattle in that didn't have tags, we were promised never to see what's called an administrative monetary penalty. And I was telling somebody this morning that that is the Canadian definition of a fine. So what will happen is if you don't have a tag in the ear when you show up at an auction market, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency person is there, they will amp you, administrative monetary penalty. That amp is very, very severe. I think it's $500 a head, and it's applied both, to the producer that brought the animal in, the trucker, and to the auction market that takes delivery. So that becomes problematic in the sense of if I have 200 head coming in on on 3 trucks, I'm going to have to take a mortgage out to pay that piece. And so will the trucker, and so will the person that brought them in. So is it a realistic penalty? Not really. And the one saving grace, and Julie did talk about the idea that there were not a whole lot of amps being applied, not a whole lot of fines being, there were a lot of warnings put out. But oftentimes, if there was a hole in the ear where the RFID tag or button should have been, then all bets were off, didn't go to court, didn't go anywhere. Basically, it was presumed that that tag fell off in the course of business. Now, was there a tag there or not? Who's to say? And I guess that's the reason why that was a technicality to get off with. But we did end up paying. And somebody earlier asked today how much the producer pays for the tag. We charge $3.25 to the producer. So when it comes in, maybe that, I don't know if it's 20 cents anymore, but Julie was talking about 20 cents going to the administration. I think it's a lot more than that now. But I guess you'll have to ask Julie what that number is. I can only see it from what I'm charging my producers. The other thing that I do, and for the longest time we had people come in, no tags at all. And they tell my field reps, my guys that go out and drove the cattle and bring them into the market, get them consigned, they'll say to their customer, hey, we won't charge you for tagging if you come and bring your animals in. And then what we became was truly a tagging station. And we did it for free. And that was too much. And so given that there's a $500 fine on that for everybody, and the fact that I don't want to be a tagging station, I want to be an auction market. I want to find out the value of the cattle. I don't need to be the policeman for the verification process. So we've started charging, and I can tell you that every auction market in the province of Alberta, where I'm from, charges plus or minus $10 a head for every animal that comes through. That's about half the value of what we charge. Depending on the type of animal, we'll charge anywhere from $15 to $20 per head. So a large portion of that marketing fee will be tagging if you didn't have the animals tagged when they came in. Now, I feel a little bit like I've found my value when I talk about those sorts of things, but I would rather not tag one animal in the whole process. I don't need that $10. I don't want that $10, but I have to charge it, or else when when somebody else's cattle comes in and they need to be sorted, and my guys are all over at the tagging station getting the $10 in, these cattle are losing condition. The good cattle that came in with tags in the ears, they're losing condition because my guys are busy over here not sorting the cattle that came in that are in good stead. So I've got to price my services out so that my sorting crew doesn't have to be over here doing tagging. And it's a little bit like juggling fire, but it works out okay, I guess. Next piece. So, not even joking. I'm not even joking. These are, they're punchlines or starts of jokes, but they really mean something. Computer expert comes up in a BMW. I don't know if a lot of you know that joke, but it ends up where the farmer gives the dog to the computer guy for guessing the number of sheep he has in the range. And the guy says, give me the dog back, or give me the dog. I bet I can tell you what you do, to the guy in the BMW. And the guy in the BMW says, yeah, go ahead. What will you charge me? Well, I'm going to want my animal back. And the guy says, well, you're a computer expert. He says, how did you guess? Because I figured out how many sheep you had by GPS and that sort of thing, and tags and whatnot, electronic tags. And the farmer just says, because that's my dog. I didn't give you a sheep, right? So that's how the joke goes. It's a terrible, terrible joke, and this is a terrible, terrible story. We had a pilot project go on. The pilot project was to see whether we could have, and this happened back in basically the mid-2000s, about 2007. We had a situation where the cattle would come in, and we wanted to see whether we could actually do a read-in process. And so 6 markets in Alberta decided to come together, and as it turned out, there were another 10 across Canada that participated as well. So we had quite a cross-section of types and sizes and kinds of auction markets that were participating in this. And we all put up some alley readers and had some wands. And the person in Alberta that came in was the installer of the equipment, the operator of the equipment, and the adjudicator of the pilot program. Awesome idea. Let's make the person judge, jury, and executioner. What we found out from his preliminary story was, well, first of all, when he installed the readers, we were given a set of money to make sure that this was all going to happen. So auction markets thought they were going to be able to help out their stuff. We personally, our company, our family business, put in about $250,000 to make sure that the cattle wouldn't stop, that they'd go into and if they were stopped, they'd go into a pen where there was water and feed, preferably, and then they'd move on to the pilot read. Because we didn't want to have any of that condition go on our cattle. We wanted to make sure they were looking good by the time they got through the ring, even though they went through a read process. So they'd go through 4 at a time through this read alley. And when the read alley wouldn't read one, our operator would send it around, fish out the animal that wasn't reading, and then either put another tag in the ear or do something like that, or note it that it wasn't read. If he put another tag in the ear and then he reread it, that was considered a read, which to me, that's considered no read, but whatever. In the end, it came out that not only was he reading the tags, but he was also on a daily basis going out and getting his staff to count the cattle that were in our feed pens and reported to the committee how many cattle I had on feed at any given time, and my competitors as well. To me, that was a breach of the contract that we had him in for, and why a person would want to do that is beyond me. So for you computer guys that are riding around in BMWs, do what you say you're going to do and don't do any more than that. Because that's critical information, critical commercial information, that if you have it, I'm very upset. And I invited you into my place to do a job, not to do extra. So that one really burnt some bridges. In fact, he was never allowed on again, in our place again. But what it did do was allow our staff to do the read. And what we found was not that there was 96% read, but that there was 76% read. So when you're the installer, operator, and adjudicator, I guess you can make that read rate whatever you want to be. But when you put a bunch of cattle sorters and pen checkers in charge of a reading situation, expect to have a lower read. Oh, did I tell you about how much money he made on the equipment that he installed? He took about 80% of the value of that, and even though we had invested about $250,000, he got rich on it. So good for him. Not blaming him for that. And it was government money because it was a pilot project. Good for him. Really bad for me as a taxpayer. So there's a cow, a boarder, and a rancher. And one enters in the fall of 2010, two leave 13 months later. So it's a little bit cryptic, but the idea is that on a day in September in 2010, an animal shows up at my property. The animal comes in from one of my best customers who's right on the border with the United States. His land is right on the border with the United States. He drops in, says, I've found this stray. I'm showing it to the brand inspector because I know he's always here at the auction market. That was probably the right thing to do. If you find a stray and you come on in, we'll feed it. We're going to take care of the animal. And he did the right thing as a customer of ours. I wouldn't expect anybody to do anything any different if they found an animal on the road and not knowing where it was from. The brand inspector about 24 hours later told us that it was from the United States. And it was about 3 months later that Canadian Food Inspection Agency told us that that animal was from the United States. It stayed in my pen number 20, feed pen 20. It's a feed pen. It's pretty critical that we have that during any one fall, but I lost it for 2 falls. The nice thing that happened was that it had a calf in the meantime. It was quarantined because neither the calf or the cow itself, and I guess it was a heifer, so first calving heifer, worth something, not a whole lot because it's still 2010, we aren't out of BSE yet, and the producer from the United States didn't want it back because he didn't want to pay the feed bill, and he definitely didn't want a CAN brand on it, C-A-N or C-V-N brand. And he didn't want to pay the feed, didn't want the CAN brand, and he didn't want one of them blazing Canadian RFID tags in the animal either. So when you look at those things and you say, holy smoke, that's not supposed to happen. My computer didn't think that was going to occur, but it does. Stuff happens. So anyway, the guy comes up. We don't charge him for a whole year's feed. They didn't CAN brand the animal. They sent it down. It did have to have the button in the ear, though. So I'm pretty sure he tore it out as soon as he got home. So this is the quarantine document, and it shows that it took him about 3 months to figure out that it was a U.S. animal, that it was with us until the end, and that, I shouldn't have put that picture up. Okay. I went across the border yesterday. The guy says, have you ever had any trouble with the law? I said, well, convicted? No, never convicted. Anyway, always have trouble with the law when I'm in Vegas. What you did today was fantastic. I know it's like pulling teeth out. I've been there. I've been at those meetings. It is like pulling teeth out, and I hope that there's a situation where you guys can come to an idea where you at least get the animal the disease outbreak management piece on the road, because I think that's maybe the most important part. When it comes to product specification verification or operational efficiencies or market access, that's something that the private sector can take care of. And industry organizations, I don't think, need to be worried about that. I talked about that at the beginning, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Work with existing industry resources and standards. We've got a full-fledged brand inspection system that's been around since the RCMP showed up. Actually, they were called the Northwest Mounted Police back then. But since they showed up, we've had that situation in place for more than a century now. It works well. We should build on it rather than replace it. When you are building a workable system, make sure that you have the producer in mind, the consumer in mind, and the animal in mind. When you start into a situation where you get the animal, I'm going to end up having to stop in the middle of some of my presentation because I'm not going to get to the end of it, but because I do want to take some questions. And I think maybe I can stop on this particular slide and still get through most of what I'm trying to say. Work with so you get a situation where if an animal isn't being treated well because it's needing to be verified that it's being treated well, that's kind of ironic and kind of anti-productive in my mind. So have the animal in mind as well. I mean, the consumer is always at the top of our mind here. We want that consumer to be safe. Those people traveling in from the airport on whatever interstate highway that was, don't really care. They just want to make sure they got a safe and reliable product. And so hopefully we can get them there. Now, if there's some of those people driving an Audi or a Tesla and they want to pay a lot more for their beef, you should also make a situation where you've got those people capable of paying way more money and making that supply chain as complicated as you like. But get the animal disease traceability piece done first, best, and if you can, that's, I think, really where you want to go. Start the money talk only after you get through that big flow chart that you were in. And maybe you guys can see a way to have that money flow through from the consumer. That would be fantastic. I'll be from, I don't usually say it right. I say it Missouri, but it's actually, I'll be from Missouri on that one. It's the show me state, right? Awesome. So I don't know if you're going to get there, because given our situation in Canada, I don't know if we're going to get there either, where these supply chains will pay the price. But if we look at this as an animal disease traceability piece, maybe we should be looking at it as a public good rather than this piece that the producer always has to pay for, whether it's the $3.25, it's the $10 charge for me, whether it's on and on and on and on. It always seems to be the producer that pays. And then when you establish rules and penalties, you want to go with a situation where education and coercion are the two pieces that you're going to be able to do this. I was lucky enough to work with a guy named Darren Melchow, and he was the only person at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that I thought really understood the idea of what education was all about. And there are really good people that work at CFIA, at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Some of them came out to visit. They saw 600 head of calves move from Saskatchewan into our operation onto a local feedlot, saw them inspected, sorted, readied for sale, and they learned so much from that because those people are policy people that just stayed in Ottawa and did what they needed. Now, if they go out to the Ottawa auction market, they're going to see a situation there that's nothing like what I've got going on in the fall. They're going to see 2 or 3 cows go through, all of them with back tags and everything great. No, we're running through 3,000 head a day. And a lot of your auction markets out west here do that. So build the system for that. Don't always consider that just because you've seen one auction market, you've seen every one. Don't consider that just because you've seen one producer, you know every one of them, or that they all face the same hurdles. They don't. And so if you're one of those people that are making the rules, please keep that in mind.